My guest today is Eve Barlow. Eve, who is originally from Scotland but now based in Los Angeles, is a music and culture journalist who has written for The Telegraph, The Guardian, and the LA Times. She is also known for her stellar work in raising awareness of anti-Semitism online and in print. Eve, thank you for being here. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. So let's dive right in. How did you first get into raising awareness about anti-Semitism?
I have always been very involved in the Jewish community and mainly as a youth leader and a participant in the more sort of communal, fun aspects of Jewish life, you know? So I always had a really strong sense of Jewish identity because of that and a tie to the community wherever I went, where whether that was growing up in Glasgow or it was when I went to uni, I was involved in Manchester JSOC. I mean, I wasn't officially on the board or anything like that, but I went to meetings and when I was a young professional in London, I kept involved in Jewish life. And really, I never spoke publicly about specifically the problem of Jew hatred and anti Semitism until 2015. I had recently relocated from London to Los Angeles and I shared an op ed with Grazia. At the time, there was an awareness of rising anti Semitism in the UK. And this just predated Corbyn's leadership in the Labour Party by a couple of months. And I wrote an op ed for Grazia about why I was scared to remain in the UK as a Jewish woman. And I wrote it based on an experience I had had that summer of 2014, where there was an increase in activity in the Middle East. And as a result, BDS was really having a moment in the sun. And I recollected in this piece about how I had noticed an uptick in anti Semitic graffiti by the building that I lived in East London, and that I had gone into a Tesco's and was looking for kosher products in the aisle that had the kosher products in it, and they had all been removed from the shelves. And me inquiring with Tesco's as to why that was, and them saying that they had banned all Israeli product from the supermarket. And, doing my due diligence, I went home and just to double check and make sure so that I could stick it to them, realized that these Yarden products were not made in Israel, but they were made in Kent or wherever. And I wrote about this for Grazia at that time, and it had quite the reaction. So that was really the first time that I dipped my toe in the water of saying I'm a Jew and I'm gonna fight back, and I recognize that anti-Semitism is a risen problem.
So say again, sorry, what year was that?
That was in 2015, at the very
So that
start.
was 2015, very start of 2015. So I'm wondering, you're writing about anti-Semitism at the start of 2015, and I'm wondering if the online reaction or backlash to that is different to now, 7 years later in 2022. Do people react the same or differently?
Yes, it was a little bit different at that time. It was different for a number of reasons. I had quite a prominent public profile, and I think for a lot of people that I used to work with in the music industry, colleagues of mine who had never heard me speak on this before, I think it was a mixture of real just a real feeling of being disheartened that I had kind of suffered in these feelings quietly, and a feeling of shock by some people, and then and support came with that. And I was really pleasantly surprised by how willing people were to share this story. The other side of the equation was in the same pool of people, really, there were individuals who thought that I was being dramatic, hysterical, over the top, didn't believe me, gaslit me. And so there was this divide even at that time. And the pool of people that I'm talking about are really all people who you would consider as quote unquote liberals or progressives, because that was the community that I was by and large in, not in terms of a political community, but I worked in arts and music industry and in the media industry, and most media lovies in London form part of that circle. So yes, the reaction was different because it was new, it was something novel that was coming from me, and people were surprised that I was speaking out on this. And then also, I think at that time, there was less animosity around this topic because it wasn't seen quite yet as some kind of organized cabal that was coming along to destroy any chance of a moralistic uprising and, a socialist revolution in the United Kingdom. So at this time, it was just kind of, I would say the reaction was more of like a peaked eyebrow raise of, oh, this is strange. Could this be real? This is shocking, actually. That was sort of the
Yeah.
reaction. Whereas now I feel a lot of the time like my unveiling, if you like, or my shining the light on repeated like anti-Semitic incident after anti-Semitic incident, the reaction is really just outrage from the community that I'm already speaking to. And the detractors either ignore half of what I'm saying and you know, and have kind of deleted me out of their life so they don't need to hear it anymore, or they have they pick things to have an extremely violent reaction about that they think is really, really harmful to them or is really somehow negatively impacted them. In what way I have no idea, but it's a much more violent reaction now.
Right. Yeah. You actually wrote in you wrote an article last year called "The Social Media Pogrom," and you write about how during the conflict between Hamas and Israel in May of 2021, you and other Jews were the victims of online intimidation from thousands of trolls just for speaking out about anti-Semitism. I'm wondering, can you tell us a bit about where you were during that period and what this was like for you?
I was in Los Angeles at that time. It was, mid pandemic or whatever part of the pandemic we were in. I can't remember if things were locked down. It was kind of on and off at that point in LA. And suffice to say, I had become pretty isolated for many reasons. One of the biggest because of my increased advocacy with this field during a time in which there had just been such an increase of political and ideological tribalism in America. And I found myself more and more pushed to the fringes and to the sides of people's social circles to the extent that I really was winding up spending most of my time either with a select one or two close friends or completely alone. So when the war happened, and I didn't really have, I mean, I had lost a lot of income and a lot of work as well from my work fighting anti Semitism. So I didn't really have a lot else on my plate at that point. And I knew the power of my platform had been growing because I had been fighting anti Semitism for so much longer than a lot of people who share my political history or my ideological history in America because it had been forced on me previously. And I don't mean it had been forced on me, but I'd had the call. I got the call with Corbyn and I had been fighting it for so many years. So by the time that war happened last year, I had all the verbiage. I had, the least fucks to give, and I'd experienced all of the trolling. So I found myself in a place where my 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 verboseness, if you like, on online as regards this, and my preparation to know what to say and how to say it with effect created so much noise and attention around me that I it was kind of out of control, the amount of reception that my social media was getting, and my numbers
Yeah.
were growing like mad because people just suddenly needed a voice, and there wasn't a voice really. And the legacy organizations and the establishment, they hadn't really, I mean, they hadn't done enough, and people were looking for comfort. They were looking to visibly see someone fight back.
Mm.
And so I wrote the social media pogrom following that period because I was in the trenches of that and I saw a lot of things that rang alarm bells for me, particularly, and they all linked to the theme of the kind of grand erasure of the narrative here, then the narrative of truth. And whether you were talking about mainstream media or you were talking about Instagram influencers, it had got completely out of hand. The great lie about Israel being the most demonic country on the planet, and not just the great lie, but also the complete lack of understanding how this was really just this was just an ancient anti Semitic trope in its most modern format, iteration, whatever, however you want to describe that. It was blood libel. It was, the economic libel. It was the demonization of the Jewish nation, the one nation that is there for the Jewish people, that's part of our story. And we were seeing it spill out across all of our mainstream media, TV, radio, our social media feeds. And we were also seeing that any Jew, any individual courageous Jew who stood up to try and challenge this narrative with facts was being bullied, trolled, intimidated, harassed, and in some ways, some of them doxed, but even more sinister, some of them were having their accounts limited, their functionality on their accounts limited by Instagram, or in some ways in some instances they were even having their accounts suspended or removed because we have reason to believe that they were being mass targeted by bots and hate accounts that were created for that intention and for that purpose. So the social media pogrom was a moment in which I captured the insanity of those few weeks, and the language of it really upset some people because they thought that I was equating Eastern European pogroms and the burning down of villages and the raping and pillaging of Jewish women and killing of Jewish men to being ratioed on Twitter. That is not what I was doing. What I was trying to illustrate with dramatic language was that this was the biggest, the most the largest threat for another intifada in the Middle East since the internet had reached this apex in our life, where our lives are lived fully both online and off. And I was really looking at what was happening in terms of expulsion of Jews from online spaces. And it came to me in a conversation with a friend. I said, oh, this is the kind of the first social media pogrom.
Mm. What what does your Twitter feed or your Instagram look like before that article as opposed to after? Is it the same? Do you sort of get the same sort of responses?
It's changed somewhat. The strange thing had started to happen during the war, where people had adopted a hate name for me online, and I talk about this in the social media pogrom article. And the article came out, and what do you know, I just basically bashed the hornet's nest. And what happened that afternoon after publication is that my hate name started trending on Twitter. So my hate name, which is Eve Fartlow, juvenile, was the number 2 trend nationwide in America that entire afternoon and evening. And there was a public shooting in San Diego that day, and that was trending lower than my hate name. So since the article came out, I've had to mute that term on my feed and on my Instagram comments device, whatever that you can limit certain comments from appearing on your page. So I've limited it. I've limited Eve Fartlow so that I never see it. But I know that now in my life, that is something that follows me around forever. And if I don't limit the replies on my tweets, which I've had to do since that article came out, and if I accidentally tweet something and leave my replies open, it will just be like maggots. It's like thousands upon thousands of people will just. I mean, there are Tumblr pages dedicated to this. There are YouTubers who have made, really famous YouTubers who have made video posts about my hate name. There's that guy, what's his name? Eli Valley, who's a graphic novelist or whatever, cartoonist. He made an anti-Semitic cartoon about it. There was, that band Eve Six. They're like an old grunge band from the 90s. Their name on Twitter is still, even now, Eve Fartlow instead of Eve Six. So the woke hammer and sickle leftist extremist Twitter users have turned this into almost like a meme. And there have been occasions since the social media pogrom article in which my hate name has started to trend again. So that completely changed the landscape of being online for me. And I've had to I've had to take precautions to make sure that my personal security is a lot tighter. Just in terms of my recognition, I'm recognized most days when I go out now, and not always as Eve Fartlow. A lot of the time as Eve Barlow by Jewish people who are really grateful for my advocacy. But with the way the terrain is right now, you can't be too careful. And I live in a very progressive part of LA, and I get funny looks sometimes, and I know what they mean. So yeah, it really did change my life when your profile rises because of something like that. You can't get rid of. It's out of your control where that narrative goes and how long it lives for.
Yeah. I mean, if it's not too personal of a question, I'm wondering how has this affected your mental health?
No, it's not too personal a question, and it's actually really important to talk about it. And thank you for asking, because people don't really give that much space to this conversation. It ebbs and flows. It's, on the whole, I put up a pretty affronted, and assured and unapologetic stance as regards this, and I fight on, and I'm never silenced by it. I don't cower to it, and I see that as my responsibility to the community, because I did stick my head up above the parapet, and I do view myself as a leader, even though maybe a year ago I wouldn't have said that, because I was a reticent leader and I never really wanted to be a leader, but it just happened. And I have a degree, I have a modicum of responsibility as regards how you carry yourself in those moments, because if I can't show strength and fortitude through those really insane moments, then I cannot I cannot convey messages to other Jewish people that they should feel empowered despite what's happening all around us. I have to set an example. However, it has ebbed and flowed, and there have been moments when I've thought to myself, "Oh God, like is my life over? Am I now just this hate name? And what does this kind of viral hatred of me online, what is it reducing me to? Because people don't see you as a person anymore. They see you as this thing, they have this idea of you. And then people who were your quote unquote friends, they stop seeing you as a person and they run away from you. And the amount of people who abandoned me in that moment and who have never come back to me, it speaks volumes about how humanity has been manipulated and disaffected by social media, because these are people who know me, and they're people who know my heart and who have spent so much time with me. And because I now became this virally hated public figure, they decided in that moment that they needed to cut ties because it looked bad on them to be associated with me, despite the fact that there was, I mean, really beyond it being a hate name, that's not really saying anything about me, and there isn't a word of truth, obviously, in all of the libels attached to it that I'm some kind of bloodthirsty, hate mongering, extreme far right, neo-Nazi, land thieving, genocide loving, ethnic cleansing apologist. There's no truth to any of that at all. But living with that day in, day out, living with really seeing, I think the thing that affects your mental health is that you really see the extremes in other people. You become a mirror for other people's extreme reactions, and you sit with that perceptiveness all the time and that introspection, and that can be quite a lot to bear. The just seeing the real ugliness of human beings um launched at you is is a lot to take in, especially when you've been isolated and excommunicated as a result of it. You spend a lot more time obviously thinking and in your own thoughts. And yeah, it's not encouraging to be at the other end of such awfully woeful human behavior. um but mostly I don't know, I have ways of just, I really have to keep believing in people and keep believing in the power of community and the power of truth. And I know that the truth is on our side, and I have to believe that the tide on this horrific tribalism and this binary that exists in our society right now is going to turn, because it can't last like this forever. It might be that it's going to get worse before it gets better. It might be that we do have some kind of outbreak into something that looks kind of like a civil war. I don't know if something dramatic is going to happen in order for it to change. I hope not, but sometimes I wonder if we can achieve any kind of change in the way that we dialogue or not. Actually, I don't see people dialoguing. um I have to wonder whether we can achieve change without something dramatic happening.
What does that need to look like in that change of dialogue?
I just think it's so deeply sad that we live in times right now where people are not prepared to sit in a room with a person that they have a disagreement with. And I don't mean a personal disagreement. I mean a disagreement in opinion or ideas or politics, or whatever you want to call it. This The way in which the echo chamber of the internet has married up with a curated echo chamber in our social lives, in our physical tangible social lives, that people have created for themselves out of choice, I think is a real tragedy. We learn so much as people from being challenged by one another, and we improve our mental strength, we improve our intellect, we improve our ideas by being a in a joust with one another, and how can you how can you be progressing and making the best out of your time and your life if you're sitting in a room that mirrors you and doesn't make you think about anything that you're doing or saying? um I really want things to change with regards people not being afraid to have friends in their social circles, colleagues in their offices, to go on dates with people who don't have necessarily the same political opinions as them, the same notions of how to build ideas or what the world should look like, or what people should do or say. I think it's, as I say, I think it's a deep tragedy that we have got to a point where it is encouraged to be in these kind of pure like one note groups with one another.
Mm. What do you think was the cause of this? Was it just the growth of social media and the fact that it is, it does restrict conversation to a point. You do have to limit. You literally have a set amount of characters to express yourself.
Yes, I think that that's a huge facet of it. I mean, it's an esoteric question, and I don't have any, I don't have any hard and fast factual answers for you. But if I was to be guessing, I think social media has played a huge role. It has reduced our capacity to say things to such as you say, such a small set of characters. We have been trained in how to whittle huge conversations and huge ideas down into small phrases and sentences. In some ways, that's actually a really useful tool. It's a very useful tool as a writer and a speaker to be able to say something very complicated in a few words. But what it's also done is, and people have overused the word nuance, I guess, in the past couple of years, but it has really taken the nuance out of our dialogue, and it's taken this kind of this kind of sense of inquiry out of conversation. And I think it's kind of what I was saying in my last answer. I do feel like there's been some fascinating, because of the pandemic and because of our increased reliance on big tech, whether that's on social media apps in order to communicate with people and to feel like we're still connected to each other, to our reliance on Instacart and Amazon. And, big tech have really been the big winners of the pandemic in many ways. And I wonder if our increased reliance on social media and on platforms that encourage echo chambers has created an exact mirror in our real physical lives, where we have decided to curate social groups around ourselves that reflect the echo chambers we live in on the internet. I think there might be something to that.
Do you think social media platforms have a responsibility when it comes to these pile-ons and all this anti-Semitism and stuff? Do you think it's up to Twitter and Instagram and Facebook to step their game up?
Absolutely. Yes, I do. I think they've been getting away with a shocking amount of turning a blind eye. Who was it that did a documentary? Monica Lewinsky did something called 15 Minutes of Shame, I think, or something. And just these cases of people, what a lot of people who complain about the term cancel culture don't understand is that when these moments happen, these trending moments happen on Twitter, if you're not a celebrity, even if you are a celebrity, but if you're someone who isn't used to public notoriety or that level of attention, and even if it's a 2 hour window, that 2 hours can have a cataclysmic effect and impact on every facet of your life. It can destroy your relationships, it can destroy your career, it can kill your income and leave you financially destitute. It has an enormous amount of negative impact. And I think that social media does have a responsibility in those moments when people's names start trending like that, to prevent that from spiraling out of control. They have to be able to protect individuals to a much greater degree. They also have to be able to be honest about upholding their community guidelines. And a lot of the time, reporting harassment, reporting misogyny, reporting racism and hatred, targeted harassment, obsessionalism, these, there are accounts that exist purely to hate individuals, and you can report these all the live long day to Twitter and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and the powers that be there, and it doesn't matter how many people band together to report these accounts, they never get removed. And there, there are instances, of course, when they do, but there doesn't seem to be rhyme nor reason as to why some things are paid attention to and some things are not. And there seems to be a grand lack of accountability. And my theory is because they're making money. It's hate for profit. They make money off this hatred. And unless there is a robust enough dog's body watchdog that comes up and can really forcefully hold these people to account and lobby for legal change and threaten the financial success of these social media companies, then why would they start removing accounts that do well for them, even if they do well promoting hate? um, it's a huge issue, and I think, and it's something that I watch on with excitement, actually, because I think that there are some great developments happening in that space right now. And there are organizations that have come up, like the Center for Counteracting Digital Hate, or CCDH, which I would recommend everyone pays attention to the work that they're doing right now, where these are organizations who understand tech, who understand the hate on that space, and they are really doing unbelievably important work as dogs bodies to hold these companies to account, where individuals are really at a loss for how to deal with these large scale bullies, essentially.
Hmm. Well, as we've mentioned, you yourself are very active on Twitter. You're also very active on Instagram. And I'm wondering whether you've noticed a sort of difference in reaction from platform to platform when you speak out about anti-Semitism on Twitter or Instagram. Is there a difference?
Yeah, there is a difference. Instagram is a much more supportive space in general. And I don't know if that's true just of my advocacy or if it's true across the board. I know that a lot of people, and I'm very empathetic towards this, find that Instagram can be quite a damaging place for their mental health. And a lot of people choose to leave Instagram before they leave other social media platforms, just because the format of this kind of picture perfectness of their feeds is very debilitating for them. But for me, in the advocacy space, I find Instagram a lot warmer and more supportive, and you can really build an audience in a safe way on Instagram. I put things on Instagram that I would not put on Twitter, so I know that that's a test for that. Twitter really is the apex of the wild wild west of social media, and if you say something on Twitter and you've been caught out in a moment of weakness, or even not, even if you haven't said something in a moment of emotion and you've just innocently shared some kind of joke or whatever, something that could really go south, then there is basically limitless um danger and damage that can happen on a platform like Twitter. It's very difficult to control, and it happens so quickly. Instagram is a little bit slower. It's a little bit more disconnected from each other. I feel like different communities on Instagram don't really talk to each other as much, and it's a bit more kind of divided into these little niche, like, pockets of interests and just little corners of the world where you can really do a lot of useful work, sharing information, educating people, empowering people with video content, or just shareable visual aids that are really useful to people and that pick up very quickly and are usually more or less used for positive. Of course, there is a ton of trolling on Instagram, and it can become a very nefarious place too. But I don't think anything feels nearly as toxic and dangerous as Twitter. And even on an emotional scale, I don't really enjoy Twitter. I enjoy Instagram. Instagram feels like, I wouldn't necessarily say it feels like a happy place for me, but it feels like a place where I can do good work and feel encouraged and supported, and like I'm reaching people in a really positive way. Twitter, even for people to engage with me, is scary for them as well. So I kind of just speak and run on Twitter, because having actual engagement and conversations with people on that platform, when anyone can kind of interrupt that and then expose it to the rest of the Twitter sphere and do undue amounts of damage, it doesn't instill confidence in people to safely dialogue with each other in that space.
Mm, yeah. Now, I want to take us to what happened a few weeks ago in Texas. On 15th of January, an armed British national named Malik Faisal Akram held 4 Jewish people hostage in a Texas synagogue in Colleyville for approximately 11 hours, demanding the release of a terrorist called Afia Siddiqui, colloquially known as Lady Al Qaeda. Eve, you wrote an article that raised several questions about the world's reaction to this incident, including the characterization of the incident by the FBI and the media, who initially said that this was not an act of anti Semitism. What were you feeling when you found out about the hostage attack? And then what were you feeling when you heard about how the FBI and the media reacted to it?
Yeah. When I found out about it, um, it's interesting your question, what were you feeling? Because I am now, and I don't mean to sound like a sociopath, but I am so, by nature of doing this work, I'm so desensitized now. So I think what I was just feeling immediately was just, shit, I need to get this out there. I know that I mean I knew that only I could only see it being reported in Jewish media or by Jewish influencers or accounts. So I knew that I had to create volume around the story. I knew that I needed to get it out there. I knew that it would be very difficult to get this on any other radar without that kind of push. So, and it's because it's integral to our security that we get these stories in mainstream media. We have to get these stories out there. People need to understand what's going on. And that's half of the battle. So really, I wasn't giving much thought to what I felt about the incident in itself, though obviously I approach all of these stories with a huge amount of a huge amount of uh, what's the word, like sensibility, I guess. You know, I don't want to. I never take these stories because I have some kind of like desire to be the first person to break something or whatever. It's more just I see something and I know that people need to be talking about it. So it was pretty clear immediately that the mainstream media were being reckless, and their usual sort of gaslighting skepticism was bleeding through in their secondary reporting of what was going on. I think it only took a matter of hours before I started seeing what the likes of the BBC and the Guardian and the Telegraph and Associated Press were tweeting out as their headlines. And all of them saying, apparently there's a hostage situation, or putting the word hostage in quotation marks. What I find really psychologically fascinating is that the mainstream media is so desperate to call an act the worst thing it possibly could be. They're so desperate to sensationalize stories. And when it comes to stories of Jew hate and anti Semitism, they have the opposite reaction. So rather than all guns blazing going in for, oh my God, there's this massive hostage situation that's happening, and the world is falling apart and blah, 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 blah. Instead of that, we get the opposite treatment of, well, these Jews are saying that there is a hostage situation in this synagogue in Texas, but do we believe them? We're not sure. That's kind of that's the tone that I receive when I look at this. And of course, the emotion that I felt at that moment, you start to become emotionally attached as the day goes on, because you're angry that you're doing all of this work among your peers and friends online in the Jewish space, trying to get the facts and the truth out and trying to get people to pay attention to this thing that's happening, because you need it to get attention because you're worried about what's happening in the situation. You want these people to be freed safely. And you're also worried that nobody cares, because that's a very uncomfortable fact to sit with. And then you're seeing the mainstream media so irresponsibly report this. And and you understand why, because you're so aware by this point of institutionalized anti-Semitism, and you're so aware of what their agenda is. And in those, that's when I start to get angry, because I start to wonder how we're going to change this, and what our impact is, and who we're impacting, and whether or not, something that was really difficult about that day is the split between Jews in America who have woken up, who do realize that their lives are at stake and that this could happen in any Jewish institution in America. And then you have other Jewish people in America who are telling their friends, "Oh, I don't care about this. This is not as much of a problem as all of the anti-black racism in this country, or the Islamophobia." People were starting to make this an issue of Islamophobia before the Jews who were in the hostage situation were even anywhere remotely near free or safe. And that is not to say, I'm not saying that there aren't problems in this country with anti-black racism or Islamophobia, because there absolutely are. But we have to ask questions about why, in the heat of the moment of an anti-Semitic attack, people are talking about other forms of hatred and prejudice that exist in America. And we can't just talk about the fact that here is an absolutely terrifying anti-Semitic incident that is unfolding before our eyes and that nobody really wants to discuss.
Why do you think that happens? Why do you think that it's the fact that, so often when these atrocities are committed against Jewish people, the consideration for Jewish suffering and grief is either belittled or dismissed or deflected to a different group or issue. Why is that?
Because it's not on the agenda. It's not on the agenda, and it can't be used. You know, there was a point during that day when I thought that this story would be on the agenda, because I thought that it would be used by the Democrats as a gun control story. But it didn't even make it to that. That was where my brain was going. Well, how is this, how is the media going to spin this story to their agenda benefit? Um, the sad fact is that anti-Semitism is not part of the mainstream media's agenda unless it can benefit a political side. So this was a story that was never going to benefit anyone, because the hostage taker was not a neo-Nazi, he was not a white supremacist, he was a extremist Islamist fundamentalist from the United Kingdom who had somehow gotten into America and had walked into a synagogue during services on a Shabbat and taken 4 people hostage. And he'd done so to, as you've already mentioned, um, protest about freeing a convicted terrorist from a prison, I think nearby-ish in Texas. That is
Yeah.
not a story that's on anyone's agenda. That can't be used in a way that's politically beneficial for anyone. So that is the reality, and we have to be honest about that reality, and we have to be able to confront that and to say, no, we refuse to be pawns in we refuse to be the political football between two sides. I always say this, that my Judaism can't be politicized. It's, your identity should not be politicized. But unfortunately, we're now living in these times of huge politicization of identity that has resulted in these tribal wars. And we get caught up in it in this way that's almost, if the Jewish story cannot be used to some advantage to another group, then it's completely erased, or we are used as the ultimate enemy. We're never just seen for what we are. We're never just able to be heard for our own story and our own identity. And this is a problem that the non-Jewish world has, and non-Jewish systems and non-Jewish structures and institutions have, that is their problem understanding Jewish identity and Jewish peoplehood. For us as Jewish people, what we need to do is just work internally among ourselves and each other to really to really root down in our education and our understanding of ourselves so that we can recognize this right away and it doesn't become this kind of confusing question. There's still a huge pool of people in the wake of that attack that seemed confused by how they were supposed to react to it. And for me, there's no confusion here. A terrorist walked into a synagogue with a gun and took four Jewish people hostage during services. There is no question about that being an act of anti Semitism. But when you live in a country and a system where that is called into question, it can be very confusing. Especially when the FBI give a release to the press later on that evening, once the hostages were freed, to say that there was a question still over the motive of the hostage taker and that they couldn't say for certain that this was related to, I can't remember the exact wording, but there was a lack of certainty over whether or not this was really related to the fact that these people were Jewish. It's absurd. That is absurd. But for some people for some Jewish communities that don't have that real sense of education and identity, it becomes very confusing.
Mm. Now, I want to ask you about anti-Semitism in America because you're a Scottish Jew who now for some time has lived in Los Angeles. I want to know actually what brought you to Los Angeles, but also have you noticed any differences in the attitudes towards Jewish people and anti-Semitism between the UK and the US?
Wow. Well, I came to LA because I wanted to start a freelance career. I had spent 7 years in London working in house at magazines, and I had decided that I needed a change. And so I came out here in a very romantic, gung ho, one way ticket, all American dream kind of manner, not really having a clue about what my plan was going to be, etc. But anyway, I managed to make it work, and I've been here for over 7 years. And I remember when I first arrived here that I was living in Studio City, which is part of the San Fernando Valley in LA. It's on the other side of Laurel Canyon from Hollywood. And I walked into a CVS, which is our equivalent of a Boots, and I saw a menorah in in the window, and it was November time. That's when I moved, and I remember this being so shocking to me. I had never in my life. I mean, I don't know what it's like now in London, or in anywhere in the UK, because I know that you know cultures have kind of become a bit more commercialized in general. But really, at this point, this is in 2014, I had never, ever in my life seen a Hanukkah or a menorah in any establishment other than in a synagogue. So, or, a Jewish center. So, unless I was in Israel. So I remember seeing this menorah in this drugstore and thinking, oh my God, it's like I've made Aliyah. Like really, it's just, it felt that way to me. And what's interesting is that I think that the reason why I tell that is to answer your question about the fundamental differences between how how we respond as Brits to anti-Semitism and the response in America. And in America, the response is a lot more trepidatious because on the outside, there's this kind of, it looks like everything is inclusive here and that Jews are safe here. And I used to hear that language all the time. Come to America, Jews are so safe here. You'll be fine. There's no anti Semitism here. When in fact, the FBI statistics show us that year on year, anti Semitism is growing and the number one targeted religious community in all of America are Jews for hate crimes. So, this is not the truth. But Jews in America have been living in this fantasy land about America being the golden Medina for the Jewish people and it being the exception in the diaspora and the exception in all of Jewish history when it comes to thousands of years of expulsions from diasporic places in which we've built communities and cities and societies. They are still stuck. A lot of Americans are trapped between their their possession of that romantic idea. And it's not just a romantic idea, it's an idea rooted in American pride as well. And the assimilation in America has been so great, but it's come at a price, I think. And we see that in the fight against anti-Semitism here, the reticence to deal with it, the ineptitude and the inability to deal with it, because there's a lot of politics around having to apologize to other communities before we fight for our own, which is frankly bonkers. You should never have to excuse yourself for fighting for your own life. You have to put on your own life jacket anyway before you can help anyone else. So, you know, that has always been, I think that's always been a conflict for American Jews, is figuring out those different facets of their personal identities and trying to work out how they can negotiate with each other. There's such a there is such a magnet to the idea of American exceptionalism in the hearts of so many American Jews that I don't share, and that I just have to have this empathy for understanding why it creates conflict when up against so much risen Jew hatred in this country. But as we know, and as we've seen as British Jews in the fight against Corbynism, there was really none of that tension. And of course, there were your token Jews who apologized for Corbyn and defended the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and on the progressive left. But it wasn't so much, I don't think it was so much tied up to a sense of Britishness as much as it was tied up with a political ideology or just a really deep lack of understanding of the history of being one of those Jews who tries to assimilate with the other side. And whether you're talking about the Hellenized Jews in Greek times or the Bundist Jews. We've seen iterations of this over and over and over. But what we saw in the British fight against anti Semitism was a really guttural, reactive bandying together of independent Jewish voices who weren't scared of getting their hands dirty and weren't scared of really rooting in and fighting back. And I still don't see that in this country, even though the patterns of the hatred and where it emanates from very much is reflective of what has been going on in the UK for years now. I'm still yet to see that kind of dogged reaction. And I have to say, it does terrify me a bit.
Hmm. I mean, what do you think it will take for the US to sort of have this moment?
I keep asking that. I've been asking that for years. I don't know, and I dread to think. Because, events like last week in Texas happen, and you get a little bit of uptick of more people slowly but surely waking up and getting outraged and understanding the betrayal that happens when you feel like your social circles care about absolutely everything else other than you. But I don't know what it's going to take, because we have had many atrocious instances of really frightening anti-Semitic attacks that have had coverage in America over the past couple of years. And still, it feels like this really slow moving mechanism that's kind of slowly but surely quietly waking up, trying to figure out what it's going to do. But really, I don't know. I can't answer that question, because I feel like I've been screaming into the void for years. Wake up. It's like the time. I mean, the time to wake up was yesterday, like not now. It's already too late to wake up, but at least do it. Like get on the same page, because it's
Yeah.
it's not going to get any better. It's going to get worse, and it needs a united community to confront it.
Mm. Now, as well as being Jewish, you also identify as LGBTQ plus, and I want to know, how do these two identities intersect for you, and who are the Rainbow Maccabees?
The Rainbow Maccabees is just a nickname that was given last week to myself, Blake Flayton, and Ben Freeman. Blake Flayton is a brilliant young Jewish student who has been fighting anti Semitism on campus on the East Coast for a few years and is a contributor to several publications and runs an organization called New Zionist Congress. Ben Freeman is not only my oldest friend, we've known each other since we were 3, he is a phenomenal educator and author of the book Jewish Pride. He birthed the Jewish Pride movement. And he is based in Hong Kong. He's a teacher in a school there, but he is an educator worldwide on issues of anti Semitism and Jewish identity. And together we were given the title Rainbow Maccabees for a talk that we did last week. I don't know if that's going to stick, but what the reason why we were collated together as a group is because there is this fascination that people have with why are so many of the advocates for our people queer Jews? Why are so many people who are speaking up about anti-Semitism not only Jewish but also members of the LGBTQ plus community? And it's a really fascinating question. I can't really speak to how my being queer and my Judaism connect to each other than they both, the sense of having to fight against stigma and prejudice has in each element of my identity, my joy for my own identity and my sense of pride, it's bolstered one another. What I've learned from one avenue I can put into another which is really beautiful, actually. But I think the reason why these two things intersect in this interesting way is that by nature of being LGBTQ plus, a lot of us were part of extremely progressive leftist communities and spaces because we existed in those spaces as queer people to meet other like-minded queer people, and we saw very early on iterations of how BDS had infected these spaces and how Israel Palestine had become like out of seemingly nowhere, was very well intentioned or badly intentioned, but it was purposeful. How Israel Palestine had become an issue for the queer community, and we saw firsthand that feeling of betrayal that our Zionism was met with hatred and was invited to be compromised by those communities in order for us to continue to be able to have a safe space there. And that hypocrisy was something I think that all of us have been inspired by, and perhaps facing that so viscerally with people that we loved and that we communed with, um, really really made us wake up to the call a lot sooner than some other people, and also gave us the tools to advocate, because by nature of being part of those communities we were also accustomed to being in advocacy spaces anyway, because when you're queer you're fighting for queer rights in a world that still hasn't caught up to where it should be. So it kind of it became a natural fit, if that makes sense.
Hmm. What are the sort of conversations you want to see taking place within both the Jewish community and the LGBTQ plus communities?
Really just honest conversations about why LGBTQ plus spaces have erased Zionists from the community, and why you can't go to a pride event in parts of the West without being told that Stars of David are banned or Israeli flags are banned, and they're not. It's hurtful that there is not even air to have a conversation to educate in LGBTQ spaces about what Zionism means and about the fact that the vast majority of Jews are Zionists. And it is no coincidence, in my opinion, that so many anti Zionist Jews, loud anti Zionist Jews, are from queer spaces because they have they have abandoned this element of themselves in order to be accepted. And we need to be able to have those conversations in those spaces to say, this is what Zionism means. And you have to accept it, and you have to accept us. And you cannot ask Jews to erase aspects of their identity in order to be part of this rainbow world. That is shockingly inhumane. However, I will also say this: I'm not begging anyone to have that conversation, because if they want to exclude us, we'll just build our own LGBTQ community within the Jewish world. And we're already kind of doing that anyway, because there are so many of us. We shouldn't be begging for a seat at a table that has been so undignified towards us over and over and over again, and has shown us what they think by asking us to dwindle our own identities.
Mm. Do you ever do you feel a sense of betrayal?
Of course, that's one of the deepest things that I feel. Absolutely, I feel that all the time, but I try not to. I try not to focus on it too much, because it's. I don't know. I don't want to wind up as someone who walks through life with a chip on their shoulder. I've never been that person, and I don't want to. And as I said, at the beginning of this episode, or somewhere close to it, I believe in people, and I have to maintain that belief in people, and I have to maintain a belief that things are going to change. And hanging on to a sense of betrayal, it can be powerful to be angry, but it's not as powerful as being proud of who you are. And I prefer to focus on the people who haven't betrayed me, and the people who see what I'm doing and understand the power of it, and who are impacted by it, because that's important. That's more important, is the work and the impact that it has.
Yeah. Yeah, you write a lot about identity in your work, and in a recent piece that you put in your Substack, you've written that a core part of who you are is someone who loves music, someone who loves culture. And you have done from a very young age. How did you get into music journalism, the start of your career?
I got into music journalism from kind of, well, not by accident, but it was a pipe dream. I graduated during a recession with a law degree, and I had every intention of becoming a lawyer. And because of the recession, and because I'd applied for hundreds of law firms and been rejected, and I hit this real, like, premature life crisis where I was so depressed. I'd got such a great degree. I had the best 3 years of my life, and then I couldn't get arrested by a law firm, and in that moment I just thought, well, screw it. I did everything I'm supposed to do, and why don't I just pursue something that's a dream? And that was music journalism. And so I honestly didn't know what on earth I was doing. And I had no contacts in journalism. I had no contacts in the music industry. But I just started doing it and building a name for myself and utilizing all of the tools that I could find around me, whether it was social media or local gigs or local papers. And I started doing it. And I did it because music paired with writing has been one of the greatest passions of my life, always. I mean, and the funny thing is that that kind of got me through my studies, not writing about music, but listening obsessionally to music and consuming music journalism. That was those were always my greatest hobbies. So I became, I guess, a full time hobbyist.
You've you in this piece on for Substack, you've written how because of your speaking out about anti-Semitism, you've been blacklisted and you've actually lost a bit of work. I'm wondering, what does your sort of career look like now, and how and are you coping?
It's in flux, if I'm being honest. It's in flux at the moment. It's been difficult being a public hate figure for fighting anti-Semitism and being so like wildly misunderstood by a media that largely swings left and progressive, being blacklisted by a lot of people that I used to work for, losing more or less all of my income, but being told day in day out that I have invaluable impact on our community and I have to keep doing this work. And yet that work not accruing value, it's been really, really tough. I did launch a Substack over this weekend and it's called Blacklisted. And I launched it with the intention of really being able to find a voice on that medium, because I think that that's a fantastic medium and it's one that I've seen used very successfully by a lot of journalists over, especially over the pandemic, while titles close and we find ourselves in very precarious, indefinite positions. But I also started it because I feel like I need to give people an avenue by which to support me and support the work that I'm doing. And I don't want to ask for charity because that's not who I am. I offer a service. And I think perhaps we're not in a time yet where we really see what people like myself and others are doing online as a service, but it's work. Doing this, giving people verbiage every day to combat hate, educating people, empowering a community, bringing them together, that's work. And it needs to be understood as such. And it takes up I'm not joking, it takes up all of my time. It's not just like something that I do for an hour in the morning and half an hour at night. It's really all consuming. Um, in terms of how I'm coping, I don't know. I don't know. I just, I'm not in a 12-step program, but they have, I guess, a saying where they talk about one day at a time, and that's always kind of been my philosophy. You just have to take it a day at a time and put out a fire as you see it, and that's it. It's a really challenging time. It's a challenging time for a lot of us, and I think, a word of caution is that if you're going to stand up and fight against anti-Semitism, you will lose a lot. But if you have that call, it's such a special thing, and it's such a privilege to be able to do it, to do this work. I really believe that. It's not a throwaway comment. It's such a privilege because the Jews that have come before us and have dealt with things far worse than being hated on Twitter often did not exist in times in which they even had the choice to be able to speak out. And yes, the ramifications of speaking out can be totally debilitating. But what I say is speak out while you still can, because I don't want to be in a position 10 years from now where I regretted not doing so. And if I'm in a position 10 years from now where I found out that I was being hysterical and I was wrong and I was being overcautious, I would have rather that than to not. I'd rather be safe than sorry.
Yeah. I mean, look, if someone comes to you and says, Eve, I want to help be a part of the fight against anti-Semitism, I have no idea where to start. What do you say? What advice do you give?
I would say to them that there are leaders out here who are providing content, I guess, every day that can help sort of keep people up to date on what's going on a daily basis, because unfortunately it is going on a daily basis. Um, I would suggest following a bunch of those advocates, following people like myself, like Ben M. Freeman, like Isaac DeCastro, Blake Flayton. I always go blank when, when I start thinking about this. Jordan Tilchin, Eden Cohen, who runs a wider frame. There are some absolutely brilliant people out there who are posting every day, and even just consuming their posts, you learn so much by proxy and just by osmosis, really, from just seeing what's on there. But also, if you really want to fight anti-Semitism, you really need to do your research, and you need to study, and you need to have the facts at hand, and you need to read the literature. And there are so many books out there, and in many ways, I feel like it's unfair for me to give certain book recommendations, because they are all written to different audiences, and speak to people of you know come from different backgrounds and have different ways of learning things. But there are so many books that you can access that speak to this issue, and more really brilliant recent books that more are being published every year, because this is such a talking point. And I would really recommend those two things to start with: is reading the literature, following the activists, um, and trying to build your confidence with the verbiage, because that's the part that can be really difficult.
Mm. Eve, I've had a really tremendous time talking with you, and I want to thank you for doing this. Before we wrap up, what have you got coming up? Where can people find you?
I just launched a Substack. It's called Blacklisted. The link to it is on my Twitter page and my Instagram page. I am on Twitter at Eve_Barlow, and on Instagram as Eve Barlow, without the underscore. And yeah, I'm just gonna be online all the time, shouting, trying to lift people up, talking about Judaism, maybe on the Substack, talking about some other things. We'll see how that goes. If you want to subscribe, if you want to be a paid subscriber, even better. But yeah, those are all the places where I can be found at the moment. And I can also be found at venues. I do speaking engagements. If anyone wants to get in touch and find out how to book me, then feel free to direct message me. I can put you in touch with my speaking agent. And yeah, that's the down low.
All right. Eve Barlow, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Antisemitism.
Thank you so much.